Natalie Kovarik, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
And well, for me, right? You are the first cattle rancher that I have had on the podcast, and you work very closely with a dairy farmer. Now, before we get into that, my knowledge on cattle ranching all comes from Yellowstone, and I'm sure lots of the listeners will be in the same boat with Kevin Costner. So, how realistic is that?
Yeah, we are in the Yellowstone movement. I cannot believe how many people have come back to kind of Western culture and agriculture and just rural living from that movie. And they do an okay job. So I actually grew up in Montana, and maybe we'll get into this more, but the cattle ranch I live on now is in Nebraska. So it's fun to watch Yellowstone because that is based in Montana, and so a lot of the towns, the different places they're filming is kind of the area I grew up in. So that's always fun for me. But as far as the practicality and the reality of cattle ranching, it's a spectrum. I think Sheridan did well representing agriculture to the masses. Right? It has to be a drama. It has to
Yes.
be entertaining to watch. So I think he hit some things on the head, did it correctly, and then there are definitely some things that if you were a cattle rancher, you're watching and you're kind of shaking your head, saying that that's not exactly what how that would look or look on an actual cattle
So do
ranch.
you have the place where you hide the dead bodies as well?
Yeah, no, we do not have that. Safe to say, happy to say, our ranch is free. From I think they call it the train tracks or
Yes.
train station. Train station. Yeah, we're a zone-free train station ranch. So
And tell me this, has the job and the industry got harder or easier over the last couple of decades?
oh, that's such an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. It would be so interesting to hear a generation above me answer that. Kind of gone through some maybe technological
Mm,
changes or different things, in the agriculture industry. I think that, one thing that is probably consistently hard, and I would say that generations above us battled or fought the same challenge is, market pricing, right?
mm.
So there's just a lot that is out of our control as farmers and ranchers when it comes to the market. And then, Mother Nature is like a huge challenge for us. And I imagine that has always been a battle. You could kind of get into people who, want to argue the climate change and different
Mm.
things that have maybe affecting farming that from that perspective. So I think we have it pretty good. I think that there are technological advances that have been good for our industry, and then I think some of those challenges are just will just always be there. They're just kind of built into your lifestyle if you're a farmer or
Yeah,
rancher.
absolutely. And certainly the weather. I mean, there's if you look at Australia where I live right now, in Victoria, the state of Victoria, there's pretty much a drought going on. And then
Hmm.
other states are completely underwater. So it could go
Yep.
from one extreme to the other. Now we are
Yep.
the whole idea of this podcast is that yourself and your business partner Tara Vander Dussen, you
Yeah.
guys have created a podcast and a spin-off TV series called Discover Ag. So tell us what's that all about? Where did the idea come from? And what's the aim of the podcast and the TV series?
Yeah. So Tara and I started sharing online kind of accidentally a handful of years ago by, education basis. She's actually an environmental scientist and I'm a pharmacist. And so this, media, social media, all of this was not kind of in our future. If you had asked us 10 years ago, would we be doing this? Not very, not we did not see it. We had professional careers and both very, very happy in it. Social media is a gift. I think it's a double-edged sword. You can get into pros and cons, but as far as the agriculture industry, I do think it's a gift. It enables us to connect with our consumers, connect with people who are interested and removed from the farming way of life, which, you know, going back historically, you usually had a family member or someone that you knew that had a farm. And so your touch points were much more frequent than they are now. So being able to open up our farms and ranches and share with people who are interested in farming and food is for free. is such a gift. And so, kind of organically, she ended up sharing in the dairy space kind of about dairy sustainability with her, environmental science background. And I ended up sharing kind of in the beef sector and just kind of sharing more of our ranching and, lifestyle, our family a little bit. And we crossed paths online. That is actually how, we first met is like every good social media friendship, or sorry, millennial friendship started on social media. So we crossed paths and we're like, hey, you're kind of doing what I'm doing. We're both sharing online as women in agriculture, which isn't, at the time, 7, 8 years ago, wasn't super popular. So we kind of became quick friends. And then we kind of realized that we both had this mission to share agriculture in kind of a different light. We really wanted to, show it through the perspective of millennial female tone and kind of, I don't know, make it like fun and cool to be reconnected to agriculture again. And so we decided to launch the podcast. Another, origin of our mission was really that we were kind of tired of hearing so many other people talk about farming and ranching that had, never stepped foot on a farm and ranch before. You open up, the New York Times or you see a reel go viral of someone talking about farming practices and it's a wellness influencer or, someone that maybe I'm not saying they can't speak on that and have an interest in it, but we just felt that there needed to be representation from within our industry. And so knowing that we both wanted to kind of share agriculture in the same manner and highlight it in the same way, it just really made sense for us to join forces. And so we launched Discover Ag.
And so you aim to connect consumers with the origins of their food, right? And also explode some myths. Give us the general gist of what you're trying to do from an educational perspective.
Yeah, so we're a once weekly podcast every Thursday. And what we do is we actually take the top, it's usually four-ish articles, so the top trending news articles. And that could be traditional media. So like I said, it could be something that, the New York Post writes or the Atlantic or, some sort of magazine or newspaper article. Or it could be a reel that's gone viral or a podcast episode. So we cover the top four things that are kind of almost going viral that week that are topics within Western culture, agriculture, or the food space. And then we talk about them. So it's kind of like a food news kind of podcast that you're getting straight from people within agriculture. And we think it's kind of a unique spin because as we said, like just last week, there was a reel going viral talking about chemicals being sprayed on your McDonald's fries and how you should be afraid of the farming practice because, the potato farmers are doing XYZ that are dangerous. And we debunked that. And we talked about, we actually interviewed a potato farmer and, will talk to him about that reel and had him give, actual information of how people are raising and growing potatoes. And that's what we do every week. So depends on the topic. We'd be talking about a range of different things. It's actually like a wide spectrum that we talk about on the podcast. But we just want to take those things that are the foremost of a consumer that they're seeing online and give an actual farmer's perspective on it. Sometimes we agree with it and sometimes we're debunking it.
Okay, so give us some myths about the agriculture and food production. Maybe something about dairy farming and then something about cattle farming in whatever order you want. What would be the big thing that if you could just grab consumers and go, this is horseshit and this is the truth, what would it be in those respective industries, do you reckon?
Yeah, so I think I can give one that I think touches on both of them, and it is, that big is bad. So factory farming, is a common term you'll hear quite frequently. And not that there isn't a spectrum of agriculture practices and not that you can't have, small scale farming versus, a very large scale production ranch or farm that will maybe look different and probably look different. But for the most part, we just had this conversation on the podcast last week that was a really good reminder that behind your food is a person. It is a family growing the food. And yes, the operations are going to be different sizes. But it really is not true to just say that a bigger operation is bad and small is better. Sometimes bigger operations have sustainability practices that they can implement that smaller operations can't, when it comes with management, when it comes with people you can hire, when it comes with dollars, infrastructure, all sorts of things. And so like any business, scale isn't a bad thing. Sometimes it comes with efficiency and productivity and different things. that are good, right? Because even scaling efficiency for sustainability can come with, you can have that better on bigger operations. And so we love to just hound that, like, um, big isn't bad, and you really need to just, understand the food operation before you judge them and their practices. And it's interesting, going to myths that you kind of just want to shake people about. I feel like we've been on a pendulum swing, and I'd be curious to see if you've noticed this at all as a consumer. But 10 years ago, it was like the vegan movement.
Mm.
It was plant-based, and it was just a very different conversation around the food. There was a lot of like climate conversation about cattle killing the planet,
Yes.
methane, carbon footprint, all of that. And I feel like when we were on podcast 3 years ago, those were the questions we were getting. Like, people really wanted to know, like, what are cows bad for the planet? Do we need to stop eating meat? And we don't get that anymore. I
Really?
think the pendulum has swung. No, I mean, we're in a protein heavy
Ah,
moment right
yeah,
now in
yeah.
food landscape. Everyone is talking about protein. Everyone is talking about animal protein. I think people have come a long way in understanding how beneficial a cow is for the planet, a grazing animal. And so it's interesting. I think one of those, the big, I want to shake and say, cattle are actually amazing for the planet. I don't have to, debunk that anymore. I think we've really
But
come a
I
long
think,
way in society.
sorry, Natalie, to jump in there, but I think
No.
for a lot of my listeners, and I completely agree with you on the protein movement. It has swung, but still there is this big chat about cows being bad for the planet and the worst polluter or source of pollution on the planet. So talk to us about what is actually the reality, and you talked about how cows can be good. So, talk us through that a little bit. Just educate our listeners on both sides of the story.
Sure, I'd love to. So our ranch is actually a really great example of this. We ranch in Nebraska, and there is a very large portion of the state called the Nebraska Sandhills. Not a lot of people know about it. I mean, I grew up in the U.S., and I had never even heard of this beautiful ecosystem, but it really is. It is actually the world's largest, most intact ecosystem still to this point. It is just lush, rolling grasslands. I mean, it is beautiful, beautiful landscape. And it is that way because of a grazing animal, right? So it is not good. It is not good ground for cropping. You would not be doing that. It is truly meant for an animal to be out there grazing. And when you have an animal grazing in grasslands like that, it's part of, just a natural ecosystem cycle. When you talk about regenerative agriculture, and one of the most important things we can be doing as ranchers and farmers for, the land, the world, essentially the planet, it's soil health. That's
Mm,
really what it comes down to. Like, when people are talking about regenerative practices and sustainability, you can use all sorts of words, but at the end of the day, usually what they're talking about is like they're wanting to have the best soil health they can have on their farm and ranch. And there are actually, like, if you went through educational, a program or curriculum, there are like 5 components to soil health, and a grazing animal is one of them. I mean, they're so beneficial when it comes to their hoof prints, like aerating the soil. Obviously, their manure is natural
mm,
fertilizers. They're mowing down on the grass. They're doing grazing that is really great. And so it's just, when you have a grazing animal in the right environment, you can truly see how beneficial they are to all the different grasses, the native grasslands, but also the different animals, right? You're going to have that thriving ecosystem where everything is just working together.
mm. And then I guess the contra to that is the wide scale monocropping that happens with these
Yep.
huge areas that are it's just one crop produced on them. Talk about the effects of that on the environment, and not just in terms of the soil health, but the overall environment, insect populations, all of those sorts of things. What's the things that we don't really think about as consumers?
Yeah, so I'm not like the best expert on this because on our ranch we actually do minimal farming. We are very cattle heavy. And so we aren't planting really anything. Like, I've never, driven a tractor and planted anything into the ground. And so I'm just gonna, caveat this conversation that I won't go probably too in deep on a layer of my answer here. But you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the frustrating things is, when you have people who are anti-meat, a lot of times they don't realize that, the option they are promoting is usually coming from a monoculture source. And when we say monoculture, think of like when you see rows and rows of corn, or you see rows and rows, it could even be rows and rows of strawberry. It's essentially the same plant over and over and over again, a monoculture. And you're just, basically the lack of diversity is not good for the soil. You really need the different, you should be, doing crop rotation. You should be doing cover crops. Those are, again, going back to soil health, those are some of the practices that are good for soil health. And those are some of the things that you can lose when you're doing that monoculture farming.
Yeah, okay. And so getting back to the cattle farming, what are some of the improvements in sustainability that you've seen over your time farming?
Like on our operation
Yes. Yes,
specifically?
or
Yeah.
generally.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, so maybe I'm struggling to answer this question because I feel like, within the, again, going back to, where we are right now in society, the last 5 years, you've seen that surgence of the word regenerative
Hmm. Yes.
sustainability. Like it's kind of like a new term, right? Like, oh, we've got regenerative farming before and we've never really had that. And that's not true. Like I mean, we have been planting cover crops on our operation for over 30 years, right? So we were doing this practice a long, long time ago before people started just kind of finding out about it and making a thing on social media within the last five
And
years.
could
So,
you explain, sorry,
um,
for the uninitiated, what a cover crop is?
yeah. So again, one of the things that's really, really good for the soil is you don't want it bare, right? So you think of like the Dust Bowl, right?
Yes.
If you have that bare dirt that's just blowing in the wind and you're losing those top layers of soil, it's not good for it. So obviously, you're not planting something all the time. You have planting season, harvest season, right? We're doing it in seasons, and so in those off seasons, farmers will put in what is a cover crop. And they'll use it to cover the soil essentially and protect it in the off season of when you're not actually farming.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Yep.
why this has now clicked for me, because about a month ago, I went to rural Victoria to do a talk. And the guys I was doing a talk for, they own an allied health business, but they also own a farm. And my plane was delayed for about 5 hours because there was a massive dust storm. And when I got there, the guy picked me up. He was the farmer, and he said, "Yeah, that dust storm, that was my top layer of soil getting taken up into the air." So
Yep.
obviously the weather and the season was a bad combination, because he was trying to get all the grass or the planting or whatever it is, and that just came in and just blew all of it away. So that's the value of the
Yep.
cover crop then.
Yep. Exactly.
Right, excellent. So tell me this about the actually, I wanted to talk about, you were mentioning these reels that go viral, right? So some of
Yep.
the stuff that I personally have seen in Australia is around American cattle farming, and you see miles and miles of these massive feedlots with cows eating grain and not a single blade of grass around whatsoever, right? So
Yep.
talk me through that.
Yep, yep. And so kind of, earlier when I was talking about that grazing animal, that is why I say when you have the cow in the right environment, they're so beneficial, because this kind of comes the counter argument where people say, well, what about when they're in, feedlots, right? They're not doing some of those things. There's not grass there. They're not out grazing. And you're absolutely right. So there, there's pros and cons to the conventional scale, conventional model, let's say, of beef production in the United States. Um, those images are correct. That is, probably a feedlot that they are showing. They are going to be animals that are kind of, more corralled. They're going to be, closer, all in the same vicinity, right? You're not out in pasture land at all. That is what a feedlot's going to look like. I think the interesting thing about the feedlot conversation that is often missed in those reels and often missed in those conversation is that the feedlot model in conventional agriculture only takes place in the last few
Yeah.
months of the whole
It's
entire
the
process.
finishing,
So
right?
absolutely. Yep. So before that, our ranches like ours, where cows are out grazing, they are out on pasture. The mom and the calf are together. They're consuming grass. That is their diet. And that is how, even in the conventional scale of agriculture, that is how the beef cycle begins. And it goes up until, usually a certain weight of the animal. And at that time, the farmer or rancher will then sell the animal off to the feedlot. and then they'll have that finishing ration of grain here in the US because we like that more small birth animal. But it's usually only for 3 to 4 months, and then they're sold off to the processor. So I think,
Sorry to jump in, Natalie. So they are
nope.
completely different businesses, right? So there's the
Yes.
right. Okay, gotcha.
So, and that's interesting. People don't understand that. So poultry, chicken, is what we call vertically integrated. So Tyson will own the animal from the beginning to the end, and the farmer is almost actually contracted,
Mm.
usually to Tyson. Same with pork. So
Sorry
the
for our
pork
listeners in
industry.
Australia. Tyson, I believe, is the biggest producer of chicken in the United States. Like it's a behemoth, isn't
Yes,
it?
sorry. I thought maybe that would be a safe one to use down there. I guess I don't
Look,
know your guys' brands down
I've
there.
heard of it, and
Okay.
some other ones will,
Yep.
but I just wanted to clarify that for so as people isn't
Yes,
thinking
that
this is
is.
one dude like Mike Tyson's cousin.
No, no, not one dude, one big company. Yeah, so it's owned by a corporation, and the farmer kind of is contracted by that corporation, and the corporation owns the animal from the very beginning to the very end. That is not how the beef industry is. The beef industry is segmented. So my husband and I will own the animal at the very beginning, and then we sell that to the feedlot. The feedlot will own that animal, and then they sell it to the packer. And then the packer owns it before they sell it to the consumer. So it is segmented, and I honestly don't ever think it will go as vertically integrated as the other protein channels. It's just not easy to do it in the beef industry because we're talking, a chicken life scale is like 6 weeks. A cow is like 24 months,
Right.
right? So they're just completely different means of growing out an animal.
Yeah, interesting. So the TV series, right? How did the idea come about to transform or to add on a TV series to the podcast? And what are you able to do in the TV series that you're not able to do in the podcast in terms of educating listeners?
Yep. So our TV series is actually still in the like pilot stage, but it came because when we were talking about food production, it's such a visual thing,
Yeah.
right? So being able to fully understand, it's like you can talk about it and kind of describe it, but when you get out there and you actually see some of the methods that people are using to produce and grow food, it just, like you said earlier, it clicks. You just have much better picture of what it takes and how people are doing it.
Mm.
And so we knew we wanted to take, that verbal conversation we were having in people's ears through the podcast and somehow bring it to them for a visual component where instead of us talking about, interviewing the potato farmer and saying like, this is how we do it, this is what's not true, this is what's true. We could actually go out into the field and we could bring people along and they could see the equipment, they could see the soil, they could meet the farmer, and just have, it's almost, one layer deeper of that connection to food for people.
Mm. So let's now talk about post food production and getting into supermarkets and food labels because I know you
Yeah.
guys focus a fair bit on food labels. Um,
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with food labels. Because I think they're kind of right now, at least where we are in society, they're a huge disservice to people who are trying to just grocery shop at the end of the day. I think they started out with like really good intentions of people being like, I need to know what is on this package of beef. How was it raised? How, which package do I choose in the grocery store? And so it makes sense that we put a food label on there and we explain, what that food product is and why you should choose it. But I feel pretty strongly, and I feel like we end up having this conversation quite a bit on our podcast just because it is so relevant today with different, I don't know, conversations, I guess, around the food landscape. But food labels have really become, a marketing scheme almost by companies of how can we just get people to choose our product.
yes.
There's a lot of greenwashing with labels that are really frustrating. You can use labels and words and terms on products that aren't federally regulated, right? So you think you're getting a better product, you're going to put money into that premium product you think you're getting, but it's not even, all natural, not regulated, family raised, not regulated. Like there's all these little fancy words that these marketers, it's truly the marketing company of the marketing team of the company sitting down and saying, how can we make our package look pretty? Use words that connect with the consumer to get them to choose ours. And it's just really, really frustrating because people's dollars are going to something that really isn't even different if you did package A versus package B.
So give me some of the good, the bad, and the ugly that you see on food packages. Like, so
Yeah.
what's the benefit of them to consumers, and the good
Well, so
stuff you
and
see?
that's the problem too, because there are some that I'm like, if you care about your food, this is you need to look at the labels, right? I always say here's what I'll start with. I always say, in my personal opinion, if you care about your food and you really want to know how it was made and you want to try and get the best food product you can and you have the financial means to do that, that is when you're going to go direct to the farmer or
Yeah,
rancher, right? So buy your meat from a rancher online, go to your farmer's market. You can pay that little bit of difference to skip all the middleman that, cheapens our food a little bit and get it directly from the food source, because that's the best way to get the product that how it was raised and raised in the manner you care about. GMOs is a really frustrating one for me because you'll see not that it's like, again, it's a helpful label. There are GMOs, but I think there's only 11, or is it there's either 11 or 13 GMOs. That's it. Those are the only GMO crops that
right.
exist. Um, and so if you want to avoid those, it's good to know I want a non-GMO. I'm trying to even think of what the list is. Um,
Could be soybeans or
but
something like that, right?
yeah, I don't, let me
And
just
but
look really
for
quick. But for the most part, they're just putting non-GMO on everything because
yeah,
it's
yes,
non-GMO, but it's tricking people to think that if they don't get the product that has non-GMO on it, then the other one has GMO. And it's like that doesn't even exist. There isn't even a GMO tomato. Tomatoes is a good
yes,
one. There are no GMO tomatoes. So you don't need to look or pay for a non-GMO tomato because it doesn't exist. And so I think that's like an abuse
gotcha.
of the labeling system where people are very afraid. Speaking to dairy, Tara would probably bring this up, but I don't know if RBST is like a concern down in
No,
Australia.
no, don't even. I've
Have you
never
ever
even
heard of it?
heard of it.
Okay.
So tell us what it is.
Okay, so it is very rampant in the US around the dairy industry. People are very fearful of it. Consumers are. They want to make sure they get a dairy product that says no RBS tree on the outside of the package. What it is a hormone that the dairy industry, I don't know, rolled out 30 years ago. I think it was like in the 70s or
Mm,
80s. And very quickly, when it was rolled out, dairy farmers realized they didn't like it, and consumers said, like, we don't want this. And so the dairy industry stopped using it. It is like currently not in practice right now in the United States. But you will still see no RBST, non RBST treated cattle on dairy products everywhere. Like it's still being marketed around because people think if they don't get the carton that says no RBST, that it's in there. And it's like it's not even in practice,
gotcha.
right? So I just think we really need to have some, which is really hard because then you get into the conversation of governmental regulation.
Yes.
But there needs to be regulation around these food labels because we need to get the ones off that are just like greenwashing to consumers and go back to beneficial ones that are actually, practical differences that you should be putting your dollars toward if you care
Yeah,
for
yeah,
it.
absolutely. And the government regulation thing is interesting, right? I don't know if you have it over in the States, but over here there is a star system that goes on to products, and that star system. So I'll give you an example, right? So there is a breakfast cereal over here that has 4.5 stars on it. And it got the, I think it was the fourth star, or it went from 3 to 4.5 because they reduced the sugar in the content from 32 grams per 100 grams to 29 grams per 100 grams, right? And
Yep.
the other misleading thing about that star label is that it is comparing all foods in a category against each other and not against all food. So people look at, and they'll look at certain breakfast cereals and it'll have 4 stars, yet it's nearly 30% sugar, right?
Mhm.
That's the issue when big food then lobbies the government around these. And I'm sure you'll have seen similar things in the United States, right?
Yep. Yep. We actually covered it on the podcast because there was going viral. There were reels being made about it and it was talked about online that, it wasn't Lucky Charms, but they were saying like, they were using Lucky Charms in place of it to make that, clickbait soundbite. But that cereal, so let's say the Lucky Charms cereal had a better rating than beef. And so they were like,
Yes.
Lucky Charms is more healthier for you than a steak, right? And so, yeah, if you don't, again, a consumer, my heart really goes out to consumers. One thing Tara and I talk about a lot on the podcast is that, like, when you're in the industry of raising food, agriculture, you have a trust built into the system of food and a little bit, obviously, more understanding of it than the general consumer going into the grocery store. And so I don't know. I hate thinking about the consumers going in, trying to make good choices,
Mm.
trying to understand what that label's telling them, what they should be paying for, because I really think like the grocery stores are just set up to make them fail when it comes to trying to eat healthy on, a limited budget or whatever that looks like. Just eat healthy in general. It's just so confusing.
Yeah, and I think the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that there is a lot of ultra processed food products, right? I'm
Yep.
on a crusade against ultra processed food products, but not only are they ridiculously unhealthy, but the reason, or one of the reasons why so much of them are consumed, and I know in the United States about 66% of all calories consumed are from ultra processed foods. These are processed at large scale industrial processing, using food substances and food byproducts that may already exist in the food chain. And they're highly profitable for the organizations. And they're also highly profitable for the supermarkets. So they get lots of shelf space where people are buying. And then there's these misleading food labels on them that people actually think they're healthy. And they're just buying ultra processed shit that isn't real food.
Yeah, so I have I hope I can remember all three things I want to say about this because they're kind of different talking points. But that brings me to, going back to labels that are frustrating to me. Organic is one of those because you will see a lot of people say you can only eat organic. You have to look for the organic label. And it's like an organic granola bar is going to be worse for you. That processed organic, it's organic, but it's a processed food. It's going to be worse for you than if you went and just bought the non-organic strawberries, blueberries,
Mm,
and ground
yeah.
beef. So I really hate when people get so hung up on that organic label because I believe personally my philosophy is a whole food diet, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like I think that like we have a battle and a problem with ultra processed food, which is my second point. MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, is quite a popular thing
Mm,
here in the United States. I don't know,
yes.
how much of your, listeners will be familiar with that, but pros and cons to it. But one of the things I do love that I think the MAHA conversation, the MAHA movement kind of brought to light for people to help them understand is that the potato farmer is not responsible for the Lay's, the potato chips.
Yes.
And I think before that, you saw that as kind of one problem. And now I think people are realizing there's two processes. There's the farmer and then there's everything that happens to the food afterward. And a lot of our problem isn't actually with how the farmer is growing
Mm,
things. Like, yes, we can always do better in agriculture. And yes, we're always trying to do better. But a lot of the problems we're seeing with like the health and the food system is in those manufacturing steps of getting that ultra processed food. And so it has been nice to kind of see the farming agriculture portion pulled out of the
separated.
conversation. Yes, and people more going for the food manufacturers that, as you said, are putting in those ultra processed steps that are doing all the, preservatives and additives that people don't want. That's not happening on the farm. And so that has been like, I think, a really positive thing to come out of the MAHA movement.
Yeah, and it is interesting the MAHA movement. I mean, obviously there's a whole heap of controversy around Kennedy and on different
Yeah.
things, but the thing that I was excited about is that he is anti ultra processed food, and there is just, I think people don't realize how much of their normal shopping basket is just really not real food at all. And
Yeah.
there is such a strong link now, such strong evidence between the consumption of ultra processed foods and a ridiculous amount of poor health outcomes. Everything from
Yep.
depression, anxiety, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. My general overview for people, guidance around diet, is to eat a low HI diet, which means low human interference, and eat mostly food that you can see has been alive recently. It's either walked around on 2 or 4 legs, grown out of the ground, or off a bush, and has been minimally processed by humans. But there's just huge amounts of our food that do not fit into that category right now.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of the things we talked about on the podcast too is how we know this, but all that the processing happened to it. It is chemically designed to be
Yes.
addicting to for us, and it's like that's why I'm like, we just can't buy chips for our house, because if we do, we eat the whole bag of chips, right? It's like there's the bliss point between the carbohydrates, the
And the
sugars.
fat.
Yes, to chemically make our bodies just want more and more and more, and so it's you're up against a lot, because it's like they're bad for you, but chemically you want them. And one thing I don't think a lot of people recognize either is that those big companies, they're paying for, in the grocery store, at least here in the United States, you can pay for your placement, I guess, your where you're at in the grocery store. And the ultra processed foods, the big companies, the PepsiCo, the Kellogg's, the General Mills, those are the people that are going to be able to pay to put their ultra processed foods right where the consumer are, right at the checkout aisles,
Mm.
right on the ends, like right when you walk in the grocery store. The big, at least in our American grocery stores, you'll have a big food landscape at the beginning, and it's like the small farmer, or the whole food, they're not getting that placement. It's the ultra processed food that's getting that grocery
This is a
store
really important
space.
point for people to understand, is around product placement. And I actually worked with a company in New Zealand who they made bread, right? But I was working with their leadership team, and they were working through a problem that there was a big supermarket over there, and this maybe opens up a conversation about the supermarkets and the buyers and their influence on the manufacturers and the farmers as well. But basically, the big supermarkets had gone to them and said, "We want a white loaf to be able to sell at less than $1. And we want you to create that for us, our own brand for the supermarket. And if you do that, if you will create that for us, we will give your other products price placement," right? And they were having to then make bread. So there was this big discussion: do we do it or do we not? Because if we do it, we're actually making bread for the supermarket and selling it at a loss, so that we can get our other products, premium products, placed at the ends and at eye level and all of this stuff. So talk to us about some of the shenanigans that both the supermarkets and the buyers, those ones that are further down the track, what sort of practices and negative influences they have around pricing and manufacturing and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, one thing that I guess comes to mind for me, again, because this is a little out of my wheelhouse, but I recall, oh gosh, it was a while ago, probably 6, 7 months ago on the podcast, we were actually talking about asparagus, because there was an article that came out talking about the decline of the asparagus industry in California. And we're not growing asparagus in like a ton of states in the United States, right? And so, that article really highlighted how the declining industry in California is really going to, if we lose that, right, we're going to be losing a main source of asparagus growth, at least if you want, USA product grown. And part of it was that they had conversations about the grocery store, who they have market, margins they need to hit as well, profit loss. And it's like, this actually kind of segues into an entire different conversation that maybe we want to go into. But basically, what was happening in California is that Mexico could grow asparagus much more
Yes.
affordably than they could here in the United States. And so we were getting edged out by all the importations that were coming in from Mexico by the grocery stores. But at the end of the day, the grocery store had, product margins that they had to hit. And so they were going to opt to go for Mexico instead of the USA California grown. And so it was this whole kind of chicken before the egg but essentially it was a cycle of like, if this continues to happen, we're going to see these farmers who cannot afford to continue to grow asparagus
Mm.
anymore.
And that does open up a conversation around sustainability, right? So and I get a little bit frustrated about this conversation, particularly for people who are in the anti-meat movement and talk about the impact on the environment, but then they're eating grapes in Australia that are produced in the USA or Israel that have been flown here, and the amount of greenhouse gases that go into the transport of food that's non-local is just, it's ridiculous, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you can think of sustainability as like, prongs and different columns that make up for it. And eating seasonally is a huge one, right? So if we're having to import from, at least here in the United States, a lot of that out of season fruit, vegetables are coming from Mexico, right? Our southern neighbors who can grow it year
Mm,
round where we can't. Well, as you said, transportation costs, all sorts of different things. So eating out of season, eating locally with the transportation causes. Another thing a lot of people aren't again, just generally you don't think of. But we'll have this conversation we've talked about on the podcast before because the EU, has really strict regulations when it comes to farming and especially methane reduction, right? So there's been a ton of articles come out how they're pushing to, decrease cattle and cull cattle because they're trying to hit their methane, right? For their green climate number, like whatever. But it's like they'll restrict their farmers in their country through those policies so that they can hit their methane measure. But they're importing from other countries that don't have those sustainability
right.
regulations. So essentially, what you're doing is offsetting the carbon impacts or the methane impacts, the climate impacts, just to somewhere else globally. So it's like you're not actually doing anything to benefit the planet. All we're doing is offsetting so that Brazil, who is now importing everything to you, or whatever country it is, who doesn't have as tight of regulation restrictions, they're just doing it more down there, and we're just seeing all of the numbers rise there. But now whatever nations that are under that climate agreement, that climate pact, they get to feel good that they hit their markers, and it's like you just
Yeah,
offset because you're
you've
allowing
just moved the
importation.
chess pieces around the board. You haven't
Yes.
actually taken any off the board.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
So let's then talk about the whole methane production in cows. I was reading some interesting stuff a few months ago about mixing in seaweed into feedlot for cattle and how it dramatically reduced methane. You're probably a
Yep.
bit more over that than I am. Is that real? And what other practices are there to reduce the methane? And is the methane from cattle as bad as it talks about? I've heard about it being sequestered back in and through. So give us a bit of
Yeah.
education because I am clearly talking very limitedly here.
Okay, hopefully I can keep this a train of thought. But yes, cattle are part of the carbon life cycle. So carbon in, carbon out, right? Because they're a part of like the carbon through the plants. And so it's a little bit different than like carbon coming out of like the pipe, your tailpipe on your car,
Yeah.
right? They're different conversations, but a lot of time they're actually measured the same or thought of the same for the consumers. There's a ton of work being done around methane reduction in cattle because when methane, it is true, cattle do have, produce methane. They are, I don't know what percentage of top, but I know they rank, close up there. I don't think they're number one. Like landfills are actually a huge producer of methane. There's like termites, like rice. I think there's a couple things that are like major methane promoters, and cattle is, right up there with some of them. Because when they belch,
Yeah.
cattle have ruminants, their stomach, they actually have four stomachs. And so through their whole process, when they end up belching, methane is released. The interesting thing about methane and carbon conversations is people will like consider it's like apples to apples, and it's not. Carbon has a very, very long half
Hmm.
life. So carbon will be in the environment for like 100 years, whereas methane has about a 10 to 15 year probably lifeline. So one of the reasons why cattle where they're looking aggressively at methane reduction is one because we are a emitter of it, but two because if you could decrease methane production, you could almost be net zero.
Quickly.
Whereas that's really hard to do with
Yeah.
carbon. Like if you think a good way to think of it is like if you're filling up a bathtub, um, and you put a stopper in the bathtub, carbon is the water, that's filling up because it's just in the air, in the environment for 100 years, is not going anywhere. Methane is almost if you remove the drain, it's like methane we put into the environment because we can get rid of it so quickly in the 10 years. it's almost like the water's just running through where we could be neutral. And so they are focusing heavily on that methane reduction because it comes with that lower lifespan, which is such a benefit for it. And yes, seaweed is one of the options. There is actually a university, UC Davis, California, and Sacramento is doing huge work in this, showing reductions in methane. The interesting part of this conversation is how does the consumer perceive that? Because there have been a couple times where different organizations, companies now have rolled out. It was actually done in the dairy industry. We covered it on the podcast, and it was a while ago, but I think it was called Bovaer, I think is what the name of it was. You'd have to fact check me. But consumers didn't like it because they feel like is it's this another additive, another product that the animal is getting, whether it was being fed to them, they don't like that, or whether it was a shot that the animal was getting that they don't like. So there is such a focus, I personally believe, on some of these advancements we are having when it comes to our food system. We have to make sure that we are having almost marketing them and rolling them out to the consumer in a way that they understand, so that they don't prevent consumer fear, and misunderstanding doesn't prevent some of that advancement from taking place, because there was major kickback when that dairy company rolled out their methane reduction. Consumers did not want. There was actually ads going out that are like, our cattle are Bovaer free. And like at the end of the day, it was a good thing, right? Because you're getting the methane reduction. But consumers didn't want something that they felt was unnatural being used in the process of their food.
Interesting. A very, very complex topic, right? Now
Yep.
let's talk about now grass-fed versus grain-fed, right?
Yeah, because you guys have a ton of grass fed
We
down
we
there.
do have a ton of grass-fed down here, and it's always touted that that Australian beef is more quality, more natural because it is grass-fed. Now,
Yeah.
I believe that some of that grass fed, I'm led to believe that some of that grass fed is grain finished. And so I think there's another terminology that means grass fed all the way. So in the United States, is there any or much beef that is grass fed, and does grass fed mean grass fed the whole way? Talk us through this.
Yep. Yep. So grass fed is when you will see companies. That's another one of those labels that's not like regulated. Oh, oh. Yep. So going back to the label conversation we were coming off of, I don't know, 20 minutes ago. Yes, grass fed is one of those ones that is not actually regulated. And I feel like companies do take advantage of a little bit, because you need to technically, you can call, at least you'll see some people promoting that their beef is grass fed, because again, those first, let's say 15 months of the cattle's life, they were grass fed technically, right? They were just finished on the grain. And so people have started to look for like grass fed and finished.
Yes, that's the terminology.
And then yes, and then that the animal was fed, grass the entire time, and that is the only thing that they were fed. As far as here in the U.S., yeah, we don't have, at least at like large scale production, you're not going to see major grass-fed operations. I think actually 97% of like grass-fed beef in our grocery stores does come from like you guys and New Zealand. Like we're importing a majority of our grocery store grass-fed. There are a lot of like direct-to-consumer grass-fed operations, because they're going to be smaller and they're just shipping to people that want to buy directly from them online. And so you'll see a lot of people who want to get grass-fed, grass-finished beef kind of going that direct-to-consumer route to get it. They will, like I said, get it from the grocery store, but it's not going to be from a U.S. producer. It's going to be from you guys, because we're just not set up in the United States to have, for whatever reason, whether, it's a land conversation or an infrastructure conversation, somewhere along the beef production scale, we just, I guess, made the decision to go the grain finished.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that is how most of our model is set up, is to be grain finished.
And it's much more efficient, isn't it, to do the grain finish?
Absolutely. Yep. And actually, it's really funny because people hate to hear this, but when you get into that methane conversation, feedlots will have a lower footprint than a grass-fed animal because of the timeline, because it is such a efficient process that if you were going to go, again, like that feels like a little unfair to me, because I believe in like a grazing animal, and I believe in like an ecosystem conversation we had earlier. But if you wanted to go like number for number and like just have tunnel vision goggles on, you could see better sustainability measures coming out of a feedlot animal because it is such an effective, efficient, productive process.
And that efficiency, does that come because the animal gets fatter quicker and puts on
Yes.
weight quicker? Right.
Yep. So you will harvest a grain finished animal, oh gosh, maybe 4, 6 months earlier than you would finish a grass finished animal. They'll be
Wow.
out grazing. Yep. For that, it takes longer to finish a grass fed
So
animal.
that is interesting. So a grain-fed
Hmm.
animal is better for the environment,
Well, again, I don't want to.
ostensibly, right? Now, and I'm sure there's caveats, but if you were to just look at without looking at everything, without looking at where the grain's coming from and stuff like that, but if you're just thinking cow, two cows, all right, cow A and cow B. Cow A is grass-fed all the way and grass finished, and cow B is grass fed for a while and then grain finished. Technically,
Yep.
cow B is going to produce less methane because that cow gets to a certain weight quicker. And when you look at that weight and you cut open that steak, there's much more marbling because it's an obese
Hmm.
cow, right? Because
Yep.
it's
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
fed and
Yep.
just basically gone into the feedlots to become obese. And then so give us the counter argument to that.
To
So I said like it is ostensibly it's a better
Oh,
animal for
well,
the
it's
environment.
Yep. Well, it's that conversation we had earlier that you need an animal to be a part of the ecosystem. You need them to be out in the grasslands. Like the benefit a grazing animal has, out when it's out at pasture is so healthy for the environment, right? That's that
Yeah.
offset conversation of like you're not getting those environmental positive impacts from the feedlot animal that you are when you have that cow grazing out at pasture on
Yeah, it's
farmland.
the nuance in the conversation, isn't it?
Yep,
You
absolutely.
really have to understand everything that's going into the equation. And
Hmm.
so, what's your preference, grass fed or grain fed? Because I know a lot of people who prefer grain fed because there's more marbling, there's more fat in it, and like I say, I like a fatty bit of steak. I prefer a Scotch. Do you call it Scotch over there? Scotch fillet,
Uh-huh.
or a ribeye. But give me a grass-fed ribeye over a grain-fed ribeye.
Yeah, ribeye is actually my favorite cut as well. I love a good ribeye. So we eat our own beef,
Mm,
obviously. Even the ranch I grew up on, I don't even know the last time I ever bought a package of hamburger or steaks from the grocery store. I am very spoiled and lucky in that way that, it's a freezer full of a whole animal we harvest from our ranch. And we're the ranch my husband and I have is part of the conventional beef system, right? So we are again growing up the animal and then we sell them off to the feedlot. And so we will finish our animal. We obviously don't, sell it to the feedlot and then buy it
yeah,
back ourselves. But we will essentially that point that we are growing the animal to sell to the feedlot, we'll hold back one or two ourselves and then do a grain finished diet with them on our ranch where they just stay with us here. But we do a grain finished diet. So I guess you could say I prefer a grain fed animal versus
and is
grass
that, do
fed.
you do the finishing because of the efficiency or because you prefer the taste of the grain-fed finished?
Probably both.
Okay.
Yeah, probably both.
Okay. And then last question, what do you envision for the future of farming, in terms of what do you see coming across the horizon that's good and what is a bit scary that's coming across the horizon, both in terms of cattle, dairy, and other farming that you guys are covering in the podcast?
Yeah, there actually isn't like a ton that I find fearful. I believe we're in like an industry that thankfully people need our products 3 times a day, every single day for their entire life, right? And I do think it's like a really exciting time to be in agriculture. The technological advances are great. I think there has never been more conversation about like what can we do to not only have a healthy product, but like a healthy product that's good for the planet, the land that it's been growing on too. So I'm very hopeful for the food conversation. I always say that I feel like right now, again, coming off of the MAHA conversation and everything that kind of politically happened here in the United States this past 2024 and kind of right now in 2025, And even COVID 2020, I feel like really reconnected people back to being like, I want to know more about my food. I am willing to pay a little bit more for my food if it comes at, a better outcome for my health or a better outcome from the land. I think some of those shifts have put us like in a really great position in agriculture that our consumers are wanting to know more about their food. They're really wanting to maybe pay a little bit more for their food to have those premium products, which I think is really exciting as a farmer and rancher because it obviously means a lot when people are willing to, back the processes they
Mm.
want financially because, there's a cost to farmers and ranchers having to make some of those changes in the food system. So I am really excited about the future of agriculture. And I think this conversation we're in right now, hopefully we're going to come out of it in like 2026 in like a really good place where like we are seeing some health impacts, made across the nation here, at least in the United States, where we do have some pretty bad numbers when it comes to our health. And we're seeing that, support of the agriculture industry for farmers and ranchers to be a part of that.
Yeah, very cool. So where can people go, Natalie, to find out more about what you and Tara do, podcast, TV series, any other stuff, social media? Give me the whole lot.
Yep, yep. Well, if you're tuning into this, you're obviously a podcast person, so you can hop over to our podcast. It's called Discover Ag. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Our cover art is two girls, and we're clad in denim head to toe. We have, denim tuxedo, and I'm holding a chicken, and Tara's holding a hot dog. And so that is when you landed in the right space for the food conversation that you want to have every week. And then social media, you can find me at I'm on a couple different platforms and it's just under my name, Natalie Kovarik. And then you can also find us on social for the podcast, YouTube, Instagram, under Discover Ag as
Cool.
well.
And we will get all the links and stick them in the show notes. So, Natalie, thank you very much for your time in educating our consumers on all things agriculture. Keep doing your work because it's important stuff.
I am so honored we connected. Thank you so much for having me on.